It's the Black Sun, man. I want to break down a little bit of history of hip hop and maybe we can trace back into how we got into the situation that we're presently in. When MCing first began, it was around, when it got really popularized because it started in the 70s. But the 80s is when hip hop really was on the move. And at that time, there was a time, something that my man said G, actually from Ultramagnetics, if anybody remember the group, he would discuss with me at that particular time when they were trying to change hip hop. What was presently going on, it was this the distinctiveness from the masculinity inside of the rappers, the b-boy stands, and just it being more street. And at that time, it was more so challenging the femininity men. Your Michael Jacksons with one glove, and he looking like, if he motherfucking touched the wrong thing, he'll start crying. Then you have Prince dressing up like a girl. Then you have, Ready for the World and all of these dudes with jerry curls, but very, with a bunch of muscles. You had a lot of what you call femininity going on in the R&B world. So simultaneously, within that time, there was what you would call something new called hip hop. And this would represent the streets, the ghettos, the poverty, every issue uh, possibly, would be spoken in wax. And it would come from many different angles. It might come from a fictitious story, people rhyming about what they wish they had, 35 cars and microphones made out of gold and all these different things. But it was more so in a masculine art form. When you was looking at hip hop at that particular time, one thing that it did, it inspired the youth. Me remember coming up at that time, um, hip hop was real big. When it first began, I was kind of young. I was about 4 or 5 or something like that. And I remember when Rapper's Delight first came out. For the first time, besides that, you basically had a bunch of what they would call MCs, Masters of Ceremonies. They were basically stating their view of life in a masculine art form. What I mean, it was about rocking the party, and it was actually very beautiful because it replaced a lot of the violence that was taking place. A lot of the gang activity. So instead of somebody pulling out bats or knives or sticks to stab at somebody, at that time either they would break dance, which was battling, or just battle on the mic. So you actually came to some type of a common agreement just for hip hop alone. Then after that turn, it went from just basically rhyming about a whole bunch of imaginary shit to actually seeing themselves as very important, prominent pieces in life. You came UTFO, you was Dr. Ice, the educated rapper. When you would look at it, if you study like any African heritage, man, just by the authority, Taylor Rock, Jazzy J, it was more of authority when you looked at the names. So it was a sense of pride. And the deep thing about it, it wasn't televised. Actually, I remember at that time that, Caucasians kept saying that it wouldn't last. I remember somebody like Lou Rawls saying that it was rap garbage. I'm 35, so I was coming up in that time, when hip hop was at its first peaks, becoming media accepted. Now, a couple of things is taking place. Not only are the lyrics becoming more conscious orientated, black people becoming more aware of themselves, but this would be the very deadly thing that would destroy white supremacy. White supremacy only stabilizes itself on the minds of ignorant black people, people that are unaware of themselves, people that have no pride, people that have no sense, people that have no worth, people that have no value, people that have no commerce to trade, people that have no consciousness of how a monetary system is orientated. Something that NY Oil said that really struck my attention. He actually made a statement that at the time when the rappers were coming out in the 80s, that was a lot of educated MCs. And I never looked at it like that. He made a couple of references how at that time you had a different world on TV. You had the Cosby Show. The Huxtables were doctors and lawyers. These were things that really niggas had never seen in their fucking life. This was unimaginable to them. You know what I mean? This was like, wow. So at that time, you had a lot of the MCs that were articulate. Just look at the names at that particular point of time, what their names meant. Brand Nubians, De La Soul, X-Clan, ISIS, the Poor Righteous Teachers, Rakim, the God Allah, even gay ass Queen Latifah. So at that time, you could see that with even in the names, with even in the lyrics, what they stood for, their principles, their mentality. It was all about liberation. And what kills me is a lot of people will say, well, if you listen to hip hop now, it wasn't like it was back in the days. But if you do anything and it becomes a trend, a lot of people will accept it. That showed at that time that consciousness does sell. It's just now Caucasian ADL piece of shit ass Jews don't promote it. With all of this conscious music going on, because you had a lot of even West Coast MCs that were becoming conscious. You know, the native tongues were spreading. You had like 357, you had Def Jeff, you had D. You had a lot of even conscious people on the West Coast, even though they might not got the national play like East Coast rappers did. There was a lot over there that was actually doing the right thing. What would be this clash was black consciousness in hip hop would be commercialized through a group called Public Enemy. Public Enemy would have a reflection mirror by a group called NWA. NWA will be the first gangster mainstream. A lot of people don't know that Coogee Rap was talking about violence way before NWA, and believe it or not, if not around that time or not too far after it, you had the Ghetto Boys that was out on the scene way before NWA. But NWA would be the turning point to bring from at a point, because you got to look at it around the early 90s. You had so many groups, man, you know, that were on a conscious level, man. You know what I mean? That were coming out by the loads. You know, then you had the influence of Tribe Called Quest coming with jazz music. You had hip hop being diverse. NWA would be the first attempt to basically destroy the concept and the liberation that black people were actually contributing to the culture that we call hip hop. Ice Cube would join Public Enemy and now become America's Most Wanted. Will be first to be accepted on the East Coast. Now the funny thing is, a couple of years later after he does that, he will get with another group called the West Side Connection and basically represent colors and talk about gangsters make the world go round. You got to ask yourself, was that a setup from the door? But how would you spark off the violence on the East Coast? This would be easy, because what people fail to realize is, I missed something I want to talk about. Even though in that era that we had, you know, we had our own styles, you will first see your first nigga sellout commercialisms of basically selling products to a group called Run DMC. If anybody grew up in that time, at that time, the very famous things that you have to be a b-boy was a Kango hat, gazelles. But the major two things that Run DMC made a lot of money for the companies was Lee pants and especially Adidas. I mean, because you had a couple of different things at that time. You had Felines, you had British Knight. These motherfuckers were basically commercializing and incorporating a company that would make tremendous amount of money off of followers of youth. And remind you, this is the same group that was bringing rock music, which was known to be satanical music. We already know Chuck Berry and them created that. But where it was at that period of time with a bunch of Van Halens and Aerosmiths and all them, you would have to incorporate that music inside of hip hop. And literally, even though he was a rapper, DMC would call himself the king.